Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, brought to you by Byrne Production Services. Here, we explore the different ways business events can bring value to your organization, the latest technological advances in the event space, as well as providing you with actionable strategies to make a business event a success. Let's create an exceptional event experience.
All right, welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting Laura Kaiden, Senior Manager of Events at Classy. Laura has a diverse work experience in the events and marketing industry, and throughout her professional journey, she's demonstrated expertise and versatility in event management, marketing, and customer engagement. Laura, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good, Matthew. How are you?
I'm great. Laura, your journey in marketing and events spans diverse industries from integrated marketing, operations, to experiential marketing. What initially drew you to the world of event marketing?
So funny enough, it was an accident, if I'm honest. I did come from a diverse background. I actually started in event planning and I moved venue side. I actually went into event design and production like yourself. And then I really, as I was planning this big conference for entrepreneurs in our local ecosystem here in Iowa, I wanted to actually go out on my own and I really wanted to curate experiences, nose to tail, the whole thing from the first email you get till you leave the experience. And I put my feelers out and I landed with a tech company on the field marketing team to produce their massive event for the year. And I think it was there that I started to realize that the thing that I really craved in events was being able to tie all the touch points back to data. And when I suddenly kind of cracked that door open of building huge experiences and curating something for a specific audience, but then actually being able to see which touch points were most valuable and have that data in real time, that's when I absolutely fell in love with field marketing. And that's how I got here.
That's great. When you said by accident, I thought you got in a car crash and somebody you met somebody through that. So I'm glad it was just a happy accident.
Yeah, no, I mean, even years ago when we were doing events, and I think it would be fair to say, right, 20 years ago or so, we weren't as compelled to match data with different touch points in an event. And I thought, wouldn't it be so cool to capture all of these different places and events that were really valuable to people and then actually be able to build on that. And then fast forward, here we are. And that's exactly what I'm doing. So
excellent. So you've been instrumental in shaping event strategies across various organizations. Could you share what inspired you to join Classy and how your experience at Classy differs from your previous roles?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Like I said, I've always been really passionate about curating an experience. And I think just to provide people with something that's memorable and transformative, they want to talk about it when they go home. They want to come back after they've been to the event. And the thing that is really different about Classy is, that when the sector that we serve are truly the people that are doing the hardest work in the world, right? And so we're building something for them that not only treats them like VIPs, hopefully, and feels really rewarding, and hopefully they feel seen while they're at the experience, but it's also providing them with tools and connections that then they're taking back, and it's actually helping move their mission forward. And whether that's a new relationship they've created or something that they learned when they were on site, or even a conversation they had that sparked a new approach that they could take to move their mission forward. And then the fact that when they're doing that, they're actually giving back to the world in a good way. And so, the phrase you used to do events, you'd be up all night, right? You're awake for 2 straight days or sleepless nights. And you'd say, we're not curing cancer here. This is just a party. But now I know this is a bold statement, but we kind of are, because all of the things we're building are actually providing people with the opportunities to solve these really big issues that are impacting all of us.
Yeah, I really love that. And yes, we've all said that on site, hey, we're not curing cancer. One of our expressions on site is, at the end of the day, this show ends on Friday and we all have to live our lives afterwards. Right.
Mhm.
So, but we are making impact. And I like how you've either come to realize that through that rich data collection you're talking about, and through that building of the community, because we've done a few episodes here on the pod about well-being, mental health, and burnout was an episode we just recently did, where like these are the things that affect people that we're serving in this community. We talk about this about in ourselves and in the industry to say, hey, we got to, measure our mental health and our stress impact and all of that. But what we're doing, especially when you say just a party, like that's not just a party anymore. That's the one opportunity that, sales teams, marketing teams, customers may have to see their community in a year,
Right.
and connect with them. And, yes, we're not curing cancer, but that community engagement and building, I think, is vitally important to their well-being.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love to dive into a little bit more of your experience. You've had an incredible career shaping and elevating community experiences at business events. In your view, how would you define a successful community experience within that context? And what key elements do you consider essential in creating an impactful experience?
Yeah. So one thing that we really try and do first, I always try and think of the attendee and the audience that you're crafting for and serving. We do a lot of, like we said, data, but a lot of feedback collection. We want to be sure that what we're building is really valuable to them. They're taking 1 to 2 days out of or even if it's a few hours, right? They're taking time out of trying to advance their mission. But really, for any audience, you're asking them for their time. And then you want it to be really valuable so that they walk away and they feel like that was a tremendous use of their time and they would want to come back, right? And so we think really critically about our audience, how they behave, what they need, what they want. We look at the data, we look at the feedback, and then we create for that. And honestly, it starts in kind of simple ways. We think about one, what kind of setting do we need to create? And that can be everything from physically. What kind of space makes you just kind of relax, take your walls down a little bit? You're not walking into a ballroom at a hotel, but maybe you're walking into a place that you kind of just can like sit back. It makes you maybe a little bit vulnerable. You want to actually talk to the person you're sitting next to and start that conversation and that relationship. And then it also provides space, and whether that's corners or meeting tables, but areas where people can network and start to connect, because obviously that's the first point of community. And people learn in all different ways, and people want different things when they show up. And so being able to find this inclusive community in a cool setting where people feel comfortable, and then they can sit down and they can start to connect with each other, whether it's just one-on-one or 1 to 10, or maybe it's 1 to 700, right? You're providing all different types of experiences that then they can navigate on their own. And I think when it starts there, we then take a step back and think, now, how does community start even months in advance when they first begin that journey of registration and wanting to engage? And then how do we create that community afterwards? And then if we think about those different touch points or those moments, then you get that community element. And I do think that's where the difference between event production and this field marketing that's where you really see the difference.
Absolutely. So you mentioned it just a minute ago about sort of that initial process of building that community engagement. So when you're planning a community-centric event, it is that sort of data and feedback, the initial steps you take to ensure that the event aligns with the community's needs and expectations. And on a side note, how are you balancing that with the event host desires and the community participants?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Fortunately, we started capturing data a long time ago. So yeah, I think if we didn't have any of that information on our attending, on our audience, the first thing I would go back to is just what type of audience are we talking about, and how do they want to behave? And I go down like a psychology rabbit hole of, what do these type of people really want? What do they look like to engage? What does their community look like organically, even outside of this event? And then you shift into that event. And again, I kind of go back to the five senses. I go back to like, if I was this person and I was looking for these things out of the experience, and then I piece in all the data and all the feedback I have, how would I craft what I see and hear and taste and smell and who I'm connecting with, all of that into this experience? And you're right. I mean, we then balance it with our business goals or the goal of the event and, what our key stakeholders are looking for. And I think luckily we have a really good, our finger on the pulse of what we're constantly looking at this audience in the social sector in particular of what do they want to hear? How do they want to learn? What are they really hungry for? And then we can pair that in. People want to learn. What are the things that they're really hungry to learn for the next 1 to 5 years? And then understanding that a little bit further so we can craft a program around that.
Awesome. So let's talk about the most recent Classy collaborative event. We've seen some really positive reviews. One feedback that caught our attention was from an attendee who described the event as highly energized and inspiring. They highlighted it as part of the learning lab, part support group, and part party. How does your team at Classy intentionally design events to strike this balance and create an environment that is educational, supportive, and a celebration all at once?
It takes a lot of work, as you know. So, I mean, what a huge compliment, first of all. That's a fantastic compliment. I think my second favorite was one of our attendees said they felt seen. They felt seen and heard by being there. And I think those two things hopefully tie in a bow, like what we intend to create and the intended sentiment that comes out of it. And again, I think it's the balance of we're extremely thoughtful from the moment the person gets on a website and they engage in registration. And then how do we bring them into that community right from the beginning? And then also, again, like the psychology of how people interact with each other and how we can create something that as an extrovert or introvert, or I'm just here to learn, I just want, 2 days to explore a new city. How do we craft a full experience like that? One example this year was we created an ambassador program. And this was really birthed from, I thought if I go to a conference, the last thing I want to do is walk in a room of 700 people and talk to or just strike up a random conversation. And so we thought about, what if we create an initial touch point right when a person registers to say, there's this ambassador that's been at Collaborative. They can tell you the top 5 tips to how to navigate the experience to get success. But then they're that person that's in the room. They already know that 25 people were on the email and this one person is going to be there and that they can meet them. And so you're not walking into hopefully a room of 700. You're walking into this one person that a group of 20 that also received this email, and then, an additional 670.
I think that is brilliant. And from the point of view of trying to produce these events and working with stakeholders who want to bring attendees that bring value and all of those kind of things into their events, and from being an attendee who will go to whether it's an industry event or something related, where you really like that fear of walking in a room of 700 people, you don't know who to talk to, it's really noisy. It's like having that kind of an ambassadorship to guide people into that community and welcome them into that community, I think is a really smart move. And I think some people who may be listening to this episode wondering what they can do to be able to start that, and whether or not it's logistics or financial challenges there. Like I would say, like from these reviews, it seems worth the effort to elevate the experience for your attendees.
Yeah, I think if you go back to it, at the core of it, it's about personalization. And I know budget, yes, that's difficult. And logistics, there's always a laundry list of logistics. And then when you start to think about creating a really personalized experience, it's just, how do you want to behave? How does this audience behave? What do they want to take away? How can we give them the tools that they then go into this experience for 2 days and it's fully personalized, right? I wanted to sit in sessions. Actually, my energy dips on the second day. I want to sit in discussions, or I want to experience Chicago. I've never been there. What opportunity can we provide? And then they walk away and they have these souvenirs, and the experience feels really personalized. And so maybe I would assume to that attendee that gave that feedback, they do like to party, they like to learn, they like to network. They're a little bit of everything. And so it was the full experience. And we like to provide a lot of tools and a lot of opportunities for people to craft that personal journey. So we get that feedback.
So can you share any particular challenges that you've encountered in the planning of these kind of large scale community events, and how your team overcame them?
I mean, there's these challenges with every event, right? This year, my biggest fear was the cicadas.
The cicadas?
We joke like 2 years ago, it was like massive rainfall flooding off the side of the building. And then it was the Canadian fires that caused the redouts or the blackouts.
Okay. We apologize. We're sorry.
Yeah. There's that balance of what can you control, what can't you control. Lines in particular, if I see a line for lunch, it makes my blood pressure rise, right? So we try and mitigate that in advance and think of all the different ways we can spread that out. And then you're balancing, like, there's a cicada infestation, the first one in 15 or 40 years that's been this bad. And we were fortunate enough that I kind of make our team go through, besides the what can we control, not control. I make us at different points step back and think, from the moment they receive an email to the attendee leaves the experience, let's walk through every single step. And you kind of, as you're like going through the motion and imagining like every corner they walk into and all the things, hopefully it alleviates any of the major issues. And this year we did. I mean, there's always the ones that happen in the background, right? And if you're good at what you do, you pretend that they're not happening. Nobody is the wiser.
Yeah. So given the scale and ambition of large events like Classy Collaborative, it's natural to anticipate a few sleepless nights leading up to the event. Were there any specific fears or concerns on your mind as you approached the big day, other than the cicadas, which, that made my skin crawl a little bit, considering the high expectations and many moving parts that were involved? Like, what was keeping you up at night?
Yeah, the cicada. There's always something. I wish there was a specific answer, because then that is the one I would tackle. And going into next year, I would know exactly what it is. We actually joke around that, you can anticipate a walk between venues. The chairs are too hard. There's things that people always will have an opinion about that you're trying to mitigate, and again, balance stakeholders and budget and all the things you can control. But I like to, this year I had an idea, like, what if we fabricated an issue that people then are like, oh, that's the issue. And then the whole experience is great. We didn't get to that point, but we got great feedback on everything. And I hate to say it starts like months out. Things that wake me up at night are the little thing, registration lists, and then it's registration lines, and then it's, it's printing on the side of the building. It's things like that. Again, there's never one big one, or else I would have already tackled it and we would have shipped it away. So.
Yeah, we have an expression that we say on site that it's all improv until it goes in the truck. Right.
Yeah.
And, I once said that to somebody and they were like, "Whoa, you mean you don't plan?" And I was like, "No, that's not the art of improv. Improv is having frameworks and structures and always saying yes and being participatory and adaptable and agile after the plan sort of goes off the rails, right? Because inevitably there'll be 2 blooms of cicadas in a year for your event, and you had no idea, kind of thing. And so, I like your sort of attitude of like, what are the things that we can change? What are the things that we can't? And how do we adapt and be agile in adapting to that rather than stressing out about cicadas, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this before, right? We played the what if a speaker doesn't show up? Like, more time to network. Or what if the food doesn't come out? Oh, well, give them a cocktail. Like, I do think that when you go back to it, like you've put people in the room, you've created a great environment. And sometimes at the end of the day, people just want to eat, drink, and talk to each other. And so when the microphones pop or when the walk is too long and they can connect with a friendly face, or you can say, let me go buy you a coffee. Everybody needs caffeine, right? You're like, let me buy you a coffee. Suddenly they didn't even notice that maybe that speaker didn't show up, or they quickly forgot about how hard the chairs were for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think that, people are going to, they're not going to really remember, the logistics of the seat, how hard the chair was, as you said, but they are going to remember the sense of community that they had and the shared experience that they had with the people in the room. And so if you can set up that environment, and if you can set up that sort of sandbox for them to play in, then that's what they're going to like when they're reconsidering coming to the event next year and investing more time and energy into it. That's what's going to make the yes happen. It's not that, well, the sound was flawless and that PowerPoint was amazing when it transitioned. Like that's never going to be the thing. So reflecting on our conversation today, what advice would you give to an aspiring event marketer looking to make that meaningful impact in a corporate, nonprofit sector or similar industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think the thing that's really unique about the generations that are coming up in our industry are the fact that their emotional intelligence is probably significantly more robust and deeper than my parents. Mom, love you, mom and dad, but sorry. And I think really utilizing that to be extremely thoughtful, and that goes that goes back to the experience you're creating for the attendee, right? Like think about what they're experiencing, but also the details. And we go so deep into the details. It's like, even if you're using the bathroom, you have like marketing messages, and every single like gift we give out is, a lollipop that is a woman owned, BIPOC owned business, locally created in Chicago. So we get really, really deep into those details. And I think the power of like that emotional intelligence of being able to be extremely thoughtful and detail oriented, and then empathetic and like being aware of the audience you're building for. I think those things will surpass, like, you'll learn how to run a show, right? At some point, AI will just be able to do all of the things that we have spent hours building. Speaker intake, run a show, floor plans, all those things. But the things that can't be created in all these tools are really understanding people, getting to know people, thinking about how they want to connect, and building on those details. And then every time I've talked to somebody coming up in the industry, I've said, go back to the 5 senses. I think that is your ability to walk into a space and think about all of those different things and walk through the entire experience that way usually guarantees that like those details, those T's are crossed, those I's are dotted. And then you pair that with that empathy and that target on, or, that focus on attendees. I think that'll be, I can't wait to see the events that are created. Especially as I think as this generation dives into wanting these custom personalized experiences as well to tell their own stories. You see that a little bit at bigger events and it's kind of popping up, but the future of the events and what these new generations will create will just be even better.
So looking forward then, what do you envision as the next big innovation in the event marketing, particularly in fostering community engagement and social impact?
Yeah. Personally, I'd love to say more AI, but truly, like, to be able to pair something that's automating all of the heavy work that we're doing so that we can focus on people and experiences and moments and touch points. I think that's what we'll really start to see. And hopefully when people can leverage that technology in a way that like eliminates some of that bandwidth, you'll be able to see like more deep dive personalization. Um, I was brainstorming this and I thought, well, this is wild, but the TikTok algorithm and the deep personalization paired with an event experience in the next like 5 years. I think it could be, imagine you and I walking into an event together. What we want will probably be different. But if I could look at an event and they'll say, Laura, we know that you love coffee from a weird local coffee spot with, baked goods made in the kitchen, but you get tired at 3, but you also don't miss a speakeasy party at 11 p.m. That could be very different from you. It could be like, we know that you want to connect with 50 of your peers, but you also want to sit in these 50 sessions with those same peers. And that's what that would serve up to you.
Yeah, I really like that sort of touch point on AI that you just mentioned about like taking the burden away. I think that there's a meme that went around recently where it's like some game developer artist who's like, hey, I wanted AI to do my dishes and clean my house so that I could do the art, right? Yeah. And I was like, okay, I mean, fair point, right? And so I think there is sort of an apprehension about like losing jobs and or tasks that we actually enjoy, but it's sort of like when you have like a recurring injury and the day that it finally gets alleviated, you're like, oh, I have all this time to run. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where I hope AI is going to go. Like I've always regarded it as like the advent of Excel. Like when Excel was kind of new on computers back in the 90s and the early 2000s, everybody, like accountants, were all like, but that's 90% of our job. And then they all turned into, they learned Excel, and now the accountants turned into financial advisors and right. CFOs and all of those. And I think that that's going to happen to our industry as well. That, yeah, your job isn't to, collate data from post-event surveys and try to go like do a bunch of math and figure it out, and sort of like one of those conspiracy boards with all sorts of red string of like, what does this mean and what does that mean? Now you'll have a tool that allows you to feed it data and say, tell me the story. And then your job becomes to interpret that story and think about how to write the next chapter of that story. And I think that's going to be where it needs to go, where it will go once we get past this initial hump of like, why is it doing all my renderings? I don't need it to do renderings. I need it right. I need me to tell me like who to meet when I'm at that next event. So just final question for you. We always wrap up this episode of, so knowing that we have some event professionals listening who want to create a community engagement at their next event, what's like one practical step that they can do to start that journey?
A practical step to create a community moment.
Yeah, we always like to give people homework on this episode to say, like, if you're listening to this episode, here's where you can start. Like, here's your first step on that mountain.
Do they know their audience? Do they?
Oh, that's the question, right? So maybe that's the practical step is really get to know your audience.
I think Google. I think you do a lot of Googling. I think you just really start to deep dive into who you're building for and what they want, and get to know them. And it will start to build a really amazing experience, but it will also probably provide you with the tools that when you show up, you could say, Matthew, you live in Toronto? They have fantastic restaurants there. Or this is the first time you've been on a plane. I notice, you start to really understand. So you're almost building for them, and that's successful. And then you've also given yourself the tools to create these other touch points that are impressive and heartwarming, hopefully, and make the attendee feel seen.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Laura, for joining me on the podcast. This is a really great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. This was great.
Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To find out more about Byrne Production Services and how putting on events can drive value for your business, visit byrneproductionservices.com. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Production Value Matters, thank you so much for listening.